When you're driving down Peel Road, you can smell gas. It's horrible.
The earthquakes that it caused.
It's all about money. They've taken oil from the North Sea, and the North Sea's not disappeared, so we'll have to see what happens.
Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it is known, involves pumping a mixture of water, sand and chemicals into the ground in order to extract natural gas. The technique is widespread in the US, and now energy companies are looking elsewhere for shale gas sources. But fracking is controversial and linked to a number of environmental and social problems.
This is the water that's in my well, and supposedly I'm supposed to be drinking it.
And there was just like this red, nasty water just coming, just oozing out the side of the mountain, just the side of the hill.
In the UK, fracking is seriously going to change the landscape. It's going to industrialise the UK in a manner which most people just do not realise.
In the UK, the government recently lifted a moratorium on the process, paving the way, say campaigners, for an unprecedented dash for gas.
The government's plans on fracking are indeed hugely controversial, and for very good reason too. The Committee on Climate Change, for example, has said that not only will a dash for gas completely bust our climate targets in terms of getting our emissions down, but is also likely to lead to higher fuel bills as well.
No, no, no! Opponents say fracking is just one part of a much wider trend of extreme energy extraction.
A significant number of licences have already been sold across the country, and we expect more to be sold soon in the 14th round. As much as 3/5 of the country is up for grabs, and people are right to be concerned about this because the government are trying to change the system so that local planning is bypassed, so that large investors can go directly to the government to get approval for this kind of stuff. In the UK, we're seeing the start of shale exploration. We're actually seeing production licences applied for coal bed methane. And we're seeing areas of the coastline, around our coastline, sold off for potential underground coal gasification. So 3 unconventional gas technologies which could come to the country, but some have already arrived.
You can't look at shale gas or fracking as a single thing. What we're looking at is extreme energy. And extreme energy isn't just about the technologies. You know, extreme energy requires extreme finance, it requires extreme economics, it's extreme governance. Because to force these measures through, they are engineering a system to allow the large-scale despolation of the countryside.
But advocates say the issue has become sensationalised.
And the image of lighting your water faucet on fire has become the viewpoint or the image of fracking around the world. Now, the reality is the media loves sensationalism, and that has now transcended the entire scientific evidence.
Fearing the worst, communities up and down the country have begun to mobilise.
This is a letter to David Cameron, signed by signatories from Sussex, Falkirk, Belfast, Lancashire, Fylde and Ribble Estuary and the Vale of Glamorgan, calling for an immediate ban on shale gas and coal bed methane exploitation in the UK. And we are delivering it in solidarity from all regions to number 10.
I think communities are quite right to be very worried about the impact of much drilling and fracking around their local communities. We know from what's happened in other places that there are real risks of water pollution, for example. And let's not forget that there is, what we're talking about here is potentially a huge number of wells. I mean, under some estimates, we're talking about up to 2,400 wells being drilled across the UK, sometimes in incredibly sensitive areas.
What needs to be done in order to resist these processes, because we do need to resist them, fracking needs to be resisted. From an ecological crisis point of view, we don't need it, it shouldn't be taking place.
In Falkirk, Scotland, these local residents are using both traditional and new campaigning methods to fight a coal bed methane, CBM, development.
Main concerns are with water pollution, air pollution, and also quite seriously fugitive methane emissions from the plants, which could seriously jeopardise our climate change targets.
This organic farmer is concerned, despite living a considerable distance from the proposed development.
So it's all part of one big landscape system, with the Trossachs Mountains to the north and the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park to the west. So it's difficult to separate out what's going on in Falkirk to its wider landscape context.
Reports in the US have recently suggested fracking may be linked to illness in some farm animals. In Lancashire, the potential impact of fracking on the region's farmland has also worried communities living near to gas drilling operations.
My biggest fear is this area is a green area, and there's a lot of salad crops grown here, and we distribute our crops to all over the UK. This kind of industry here in Lancashire, with the amount of wells that they need to make it economically viable, will completely destroy that.
This isn't going to bring jobs or security, fuel security for the Fylde area. There are huge unknowns about health risks to the water, the aquifers. This isn't a stable area, it's liable to subsidence at the best of times, and there are all sorts of risks associated, and it's just a retrograde step, and we need to be investing in renewables for the long-term future. This is very, very short-term and potentially disastrous.
Opposition to fracking in Lancashire grew dramatically following an earthquake linked to exploratory gas drilling.
I've never been through an earthquake before. It was a very scary moment, to be honest with you. I've never, had my house moving. Who has?
This led directly to the temporary nationwide moratorium. Although this has now been lifted, some communities remain in limbo. In Sussex, it is unclear whether fracking near Balcombe will go ahead.
Fracking is a process I wouldn't wish on anyone, anywhere. I think it's a poisonous, potentially very dangerous process. Here in Sussex, in Balcombe, it is classified as an area of outstanding natural beauty. People have livestock, there are farms, we have beautiful streams running through. It's a lovely place to live. Fracking and the industrialisation of the landscape could ruin that.
Locals worry about the potential impact on the area's water supply.
If you're forcing high volumes of water and carcinogenic chemicals into the ground at a kind of pressure that would fracture million-year-old rock, relying on your own cement casings, that is going to leak. It's going to go through, it's going to get into the groundwater, it's going to get into the aquifer, it's going to get into the reservoirs. The gas is going to leak into the atmosphere. Water meets water. Water goes from everywhere to everywhere. You can't separate it. You can't legislate for the vagaries of subterranean geology.
There are concerns with the water if things go wrong, but there are concerns with the volumes of water that are just being used by the process. The process, by its nature, pollutes and taints water. It mixes it with chemicals, it flushes it through shale and leaches out other elements that have been stored in the shale successfully for millions of years.
Experts are now asking whether the full cost implications have yet been fully considered.
If there was serious groundwater pollution, then it would cost a lot of money to clean that water. But it could be that it would be such an expense that it wouldn't actually be worth doing, and therefore you're going to be left with a long-term pollution problem in that particular vicinity, in that particular community.
Fracking chiefs say much of the opposition is based on misinformation.
It's not fracking is unsafe, not the procedure is unsafe, but if someone makes a mistake, then anything can happen. And I think that people are foolish to think that there's some form of energy, and that includes wind or solar or any other type of energy, nuclear, we saw what happened in Japan, that comes without any kind of risk, that pops out of the ground, powers the plug in your wall, and produces energy that has no consequence or risk. And that's just not possible.
They're trying to convince us that they're going to do it safely. Safe fracking is the oxymoron of the decade.